Hello, I'm Alex Lindsay, and I'm joined by Mason Kopaz. We are representing the Masters of Business Analytics program at Oklahoma State University. We are presenting our findings on our research of what happens after police shootings in the United States. We would first like to thank SAS for the opportunity to present our findings. Additionally, we would like to thank the judges for taking time out of your schedules to listen to our presentation and the opportunity to interact. I'm currently a captain in the U.S. Air Force, and I took on the role of project manager. Aravind Donaval is a full-time student, and he served as our business analyst. And Mason Kopaz works as a data analyst in the insurance sector. Today, we will go over our introduction, problem statement, methods used, analysis, and our results and recommendations. Over the past 30 years, the United States has had numerous infamous police shooting and police brutality cases, from Rodney King in Los Angeles in 1991 to Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. The United States has been facing a problem of police brutality. Compared to other developed nations, the United States dwarfs countries like Great Britain and Germany. In 2016, Germany had 8 and Great Britain had 0 deaths due to police shootings. Per million residents, Germany has 0.09 police shooting deaths, as opposed to the United States at 3.22. There is no lack of ideas that aim to reduce the levels of police shootings in America. Some states have mandated body cameras for police officers, while some cities have social workers accompany on-duty officers, hopefully to diffuse tense situations. The aim of the study is to determine if there are more underlying societal issues that could be causing the use of lethal force and the follow-on investigation of the officers who used it. The goal is to gain insights into the variables that lead to a perceived justified or unjustified police shooting, and forecast the shootings across the United States for the next 10 months, in an effort to provide key insights to those campaigning for reform. A police shooting is perceived to be justified if there is no grand jury indictment from the district attorney. And I will pass it over to my co-presenter, Mason.
Thanks, Alex. The data we're using comes from fatalencounters.org, who has been tracking the victims of police shootings since the year 2000. Fatal Encounters has volunteers who comb through the law enforcement websites, social media, and independent databases to compile this data and then input it into the database. The database itself contains variables such as age of the victim, race of the victim, such as Caucasian, African American, or Hispanic, gender, male, female, or transgender, the city, county, state of the event. Was the officer aware of any impairment in mental state or intoxication of the victims, as well as the officer disposition, which represents the end result of the event, such as indicted by a grand jury or not? Additionally, population data was collected from the 2010 census. The census data was used to normalize the police shooting data from fatal encounters. So as you can imagine, because of the scope of the inputs as well as the volunteer nature of the persons inputting the data, many variables were missing or collected in a non-similar fashion. Age, race, and officer disposition were among the most unreported. To prep the data, we binned the ages into groups, with the first being 0 to 19 and the rest of the ages at 10-year intervals after that. For the analysis, the data was partitioned with a 70-30 split for training and validation, and our target variable was the disposition of the officer, which is whether the shooting was deemed justified, unjustified, or unreported. So this brings us to the descriptive analytics. So one of the first things we saw in our analysis were that males make up a far greater proportion of the victims than females, and that holds for all races. Then when looking at the data by race, we see that the largest group of victims by volume were white males, and they represented approximately 43% of the observations. However, using the census data to control for population, we found that African Americans and Hispanics were the most affected group, with a much higher shooting per million than whites. And so what this shows is that race appears to be playing a determining factor in police shootings and should be considered in our model. Next, we turn to age, where we see that the incidents peak at the 20 to 29 age group, and that a large proportion of the shootings are occurring to persons under 40, and they represented around 65% of the shootings. And so what this chart shows is the proportion of race by age bands, And we see that African Americans and Hispanics are making up a larger proportion in the prime age bands of the 20 to 39 group, which is concerning considering their lower percentage of the overall population. Their proportions proceed to decrease in their later age bands and are more in line with population percentages as a whole. So this is showing that age is playing a factor and should possibly be considered in our model. So finally, we looked into the mental state of the victims, and so what the below plot shows is whether or not police officers were aware of any mental illnesses or intoxication of the victims at the time of the shootings. So no is they were unaware, unknown indicates it is unsure if they were aware or not, yes means they were aware, and the last column is yes, they were aware of impairment, and the red portion shows events that ended in suicide. And so what we see is that 17% of the shootings involved a person who was mentally ill or intoxicated, and of those, 15% ended in suicide. We also see that where the police were not aware of any sort of mental issues, 12% of those instances ended in suicide as well, which suggests perhaps that there are issues in determining the mental state during these high-pressure incidences. And this is an example of where social workers joining officers on call can really make a difference in the shootings of those that are suffering from mental illnesses or are suicidal. So we included this map that shows the deaths per million for each state's population, and while ideally we would like to get this down to the county level, we believe this provides the insights into which states have abnormally high rates of police shootings and could play a role in the modeling. So the icons here are indicating the cities that have implemented the body cam initiative. And these red arrows are pointing to the cities that have implemented a social worker joining the officer on a call initiative. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alex, and he is going to go over the predictive analytics section.
Thank you, Mason. Now I will dive into our analytical models. When building our models, we decided to use perceived justified and unjustified variable as our target. As a reminder, what makes a shooting perceived as justified or unjustified is the determination to move to a grand jury indictment. Additionally, the variables received from fatalencounters.org does not include many variables that should be included to truly create the best model possible. In order to create the best model, we decided to use misclassification rate as our determinant, since we want to have high accuracy in the determining factors that lead to a perceived justified and unjustified shooting. We built logistic regression, decision tree, and gradient boosting models with varying features and used misclassification rate as the determinant for the model performance. The decision tree with chi-square outperformed all models, recording 64.26% accuracy, while also producing the second highest sensitivity at 64.2%. The actual perceived justified disposition of the police officers account for 46.84% of the police shootings in our dataset. On the slide, we have our actual and predicted results in a confusion matrix. We found that the model performed fairly well with the accuracy of 64.26%. Like we said earlier, we have a precision of 64.20 and a recall of 61.43. This results in an F measure of 0.6278. Since a perfect score would be 1, we conclude the model performed fairly well with the data that we had. In our selected model, we identified the most important variables as seen here. State, county, and department involved are the most important variables in determining if a shooting will be perceived as justified or unjustified, all with a relative importance over 80%. Mentally impaired, so that's the drugs or alcohol involvement, along with age group, race, and gender, lag far behind our location-based variables. I think that it's important to refer back to our descriptive statistics and the disparity in shootings per million for the different races. When we evaluate the after action of the investigations, the race of the individual is not as important when it comes to determining if the shooting will be perceived as justified or not. On our slide, we have an exponential smoothing forecast of police shootings in the United States from the end of our analysis period, November 2019 to October 2020. We matched our forecast to actuals from November through February and found our model performed very well, and all actual values were placed in our 95% confidence interval. In the model, there's a major drop-off in the months of August, September, and October. This is due to a major slowdown of shootings in those months in 2019. We were unable to conclude if this is due to actions being taken in police departments to focus on the easing of the use of lethal force. We additionally studied a risk assessment of individuals, and we found that the high-risk demographics are going to be in the states of Georgia, Nebraska, Arizona, Maryland, and Louisiana. The races of Hispanic and Latino or African American with no signs of mental illness or being drugged, and in the age groups of 20 to 39. And our low-risk profiles are going to be the state of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kansas, and Oklahoma. The races are Middle Eastern and Native American with signs of mental illness, and in the age groups of 40 to 59. In conclusion, our study uncovered that African Americans and Hispanic and Latinos are victims of police shootings more often than white Americans per capita. Ages 20 to 39 are the most prone to becoming victims of police shootings, amassing 65% of all recorded incidents. The predictive model found the location-based variables to be more important than the victim's race or age when it comes to a perceived justified versus unjustified investigation. This model could be used in practical application by an oversight committee to ensure there is standardization across states, counties, and police departments for launching investigations into police shooting incidents. In the future, we would like to use this predictive model to be used on a national police database that includes limited amounts of missing data and includes other variables that are not found in the Fatal Encounters database. This could include police officer profiling data, which could give more insight to the user of lethal force. We would also like to use the predictive model for all police responses in order to give police officers more actionable data. Uses could include DUI checkpoints at high reported areas or police patrols in high theft areas. Additionally, we could use the forecast model to expand to all police responses. This could give advocacy for police departments to gain additional funding from local and state legislatures to combat crime and reportable incidents. Once again, we would like to thank you for your time and SAS's hospitality. We truly appreciate this opportunity and look forward to your questions.